Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another You Be the Behavior Consultant. I'm so excited. We have such a great topic for you this morning. Can you hear me there? Oh, can I hear myself? Yes, I can. Okay. Yes, I'm so excited about this topic. I spent the whole week, I think, researching it, and I think it's going to be very enlightening. Oh, yes. And Cynthia says, great topic. Yeah, so let's go ahead and get into it. All right. This is You Be the Behavior Consultant, a live stream I try to do most Mondays. And this is how it works. I present a topic. We've got some questions to prompt your discussion because I'd love for it to be interactive. I don't think I have any video examples for you today. I'm so sorry, but this is not a good one for video. But there's a lot of slides, so we will have lots of visuals. Let's put it that way, and then we're going to recap it at the end. So I'm looking forward to getting into this one. We are going to talk about how do you dissect those journal articles that we like to read about animal training. Well, at least I like to read them. I hope you like to read them. Because they really are becoming such a big part of what we do these days. It seems like there's more and more journal articles coming out there. And how do we know if the article we are reading is trustworthy and reliable? What do you evaluate to give you information? And are there any things when you're reading that kind of jump out at you as red flags that you kind of go, ooh, I need to stop and think about that. So those are my questions to get you thinking. So so I see we got some people on here. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about those questions there as we get started, and I can go ahead and start jumping into slides because I do have a lot of them. Oh, and Annette is here. Yay. For some reason, I feel like my audio is very quiet, but hopefully you can hear me. Oh, there I am there. Okay, good. Okay, so what do you guys think? Do you have a process when you're looking at journal articles that, kind of helps you decide if what you're reading is something that you're like, yeah, this is awesome, or I'm not sure about this one. Is there any place you start? Do you just automatically go, yes, this is amazing? Source, author, qualifications. Absolutely. That would go under that category of credibility. And Ruth says, I look at the publishing journal and the journal title. Citations. Oh, these are great. You guys are awesome. Right out of the box, you're coming out with excellent things to look at. Absolutely. I love it. Perfect. Well, maybe because of some of the things you've mentioned, number of animals in the study. Okay. So you like the sample size. Okay. That's, so you're kind of looking at whether it's empirical or not, which I think is a great question to ask. Oh, I love this. You guys are good. We have a very educated audience, I think, which I really appreciate. These are great recommendations. Okay. So maybe does somebody recommend the publication of something that you might want to read? Yeah. Oh yeah. You do see that sort of in, in ResearchGate, maybe they mentioned like how many times has this article been recommended. Yeah, and I have to admit, even in all the research I did for this particular topic, I think I barely even scratched the surface. There's so much farther you can even go to give you more information about whether what you're reading is trustworthy and reliable. So believe me, this is just the beginning. This is awesome. You guys are coming up with great stuff. All right, keep it coming. I'm going to start with one of the comments that you made, based on data, not opinion. Oh, that's such a good one. That is one that I definitely have in everything you guys have mentioned in here. I have in here. So this is good. And the data one is a really good one. Okay, keep it coming. I'm going to go ahead and jump into one of the first things that I have on here, which is one of the things that you guys have mentioned. And that is, what is the type of publication that you're looking at? So evaluate the publication for your purposes, whatever you're looking at. So we know we've got scholarly journals, right? And these journals are typically peer reviewed, meaning that other experts in the field reviewed it. And they're a good place for original research, reviews of existing literature and theoretical pieces. However, that we do know the peer review system is not challenge free, and we're gonna talk about that. Alex says clear definitions of behaviors and the procedures are clearly defined. Yeah. So and especially for us in our field. So I like that you mentioned that, because I have that later on here as well. Some kind of talking about the language that the person uses in their publication, to me says something, right? How they speak in the article says something to me. So I really like that comment. Yeah, keep it coming. You guys are good, dang. I love my audience. All right, open access journals and so like the photo here, this is something that I participated in from Elsevier, and they have a peer review process, but again, it's not perfect, right? We know this. And as we go through this, you'll see that there's more that needs to be evaluated, even if it is published in something we think of as reliable. Open access journals. So these make their articles freely available to everyone online. They can be controversial because they may not have the same quality control standards as a traditional peer-reviewed journal. So that's another type of publication. And then you guys may have heard about predatory journals. And these are the ones that exploit that open access publishing model for profit. And so they don't really provide a peer review process, even though they may say so. And they basically kind of ask an author to pay to be published. And so it can be a way for somebody to get published in a quoted journal, but it's pretty, kind of shady. So you may have heard about this one where I have the bird there, where it says sketchy science journal publishes article titled "What's the Deal with Birds?" And if you look it up, it's like this complete nonsense article. And the author actually did find a way to not have to pay the fee, but it still got published. So shady stuff there. So Ruth says, yeah, methods are often glazed over or not even mentioned in articles that aren't as stringently reviewed. Yeah. So we can see this this process here, and maybe in the predatory journals that that there's really no checks and balances, but it's a way for maybe somebody to get around the system and say, oh, I got something published. Trade journals. So these are just our trade organizations that again, it doesn't mean that they're not publishing something good, but they may. It's going to require you to use your critical skills to evaluate what is being published there. It may be good, it may not be good. Where it can get controversial is if they're favoring certain companies or individuals or perspectives or opinions or products. So you have to use your critical thinking skills to see if the content that's in the trade journal is of value or not to you. And then, of course, we have popular magazines, and those are really just written for general audiences. They may publish something scientific or just, a popular topic in an accessible way. And the pictures I'm showing you here are from popular magazines where I publish articles. The one in Bust magazine was a little fluffy thing about training cats to target. And then Picos and Plumas was a Spanish magazine where I wrote something about harness training parrots. And again, I never have referenced those articles for anything, because those were not, I don't consider those as something that I would reference in, any kind of literature that I'm writing for anybody. And Alex gave you the reference for, What's the Deal with Birds by Jerry Seinfeld. Not the actual original author, but could have been, right? Okay. And then, of course, people do self-publish articles, and they can post them on their website, on their blog. In a way, a conference proceedings can be kind of like a self-published thing, because they're, even though sometimes those can have some rigor to, I've had some conference proceedings where they did do a little bit of a peer review process, but I would say for most of the conferences in the animal training community, I haven't had there be any editorial process on those or peer review process. They just kind of publish them. So it's almost like self-publishing. I would say the rigor is, it varies tremendously. So that's really, again, up to the reader to take a look at that and go, well, is this valid or not? But we're going to come back to the self-publishing, because that becomes really important, as somebody mentioned already, in the citations, right? So we need to keep an eye out for that when we look at our references. Okay, so you guys are coming up with good stuff here. So now that we've looked at the type of publications, now this comes back to something. Oh, let's see. Someone will nitpick another person's work due to viewing them as competition for funding or attention. Yeah, that can be true. Absolutely. Let's see. So now we have to look at the types of articles. So now we have to evaluate the article. Is it empirical or opinion, which somebody mentioned already, which is a great question. And again, it kind of depends on the purpose of why you're potentially looking at the article. So we have original research. And again, I'm just giving you a limited sample of types of papers. There's lots of different types of articles out there. And I'll mention a resource in a minute here about where you can find like a list of a whole bunch of different types of articles. But, we have original research papers. And of course, empirical means that, they were observing and collecting data and analyzing that data. So these articles represent the original research studies. So they might have an introduction, some methodology, some results, some discussion and conclusion. And typically they're looking at new contributions to the field, or maybe they're, kind of retesting something that's been observed before and maybe kind of coming to the same conclusion, or maybe not, so that they're comparing that research. You might get review articles where it's like a comprehensive summary and analysis of existing research on a topic, and those can be helpful too. Case studies, we like case studies a lot, especially in our industry, because that's kind of easier for us to do, where we can take an individual, compare where they were at the beginning, and then what happened after we did an intervention, and what was the result of that. So that kind of works well for our industry. Meta-analysis, again, is kind of taking data from multiple studies and analyzing that. And Cynthia says, if it's a research study, are there controls? Is it blinded? Or so that, it really is no confirmation bias there. And also, could there be conflicts of interest? Yeah, those are really good questions to ask. There are other kinds of articles that's maybe like a short communication, maybe just a brief overview of some concise findings, often focused on something very specific, just like a quick dissemination of noteworthy results, and maybe the big stuff is coming later to tell you all the details. And then here's where I think you have to use a little bit more of your critical thinking skills, although like Cynthia said, if it's a research study, you have to use your critical thinking skills on if it was blinded or not and stuff like that. And if there were conflicts of interest, like, was it funded by the people who want you to get the results that they would like to see? So like, on opinion pieces, this is where, our personal opinions or perspectives, kind of swaying what you're reading. And so, and this is where some of the stuff we're going to get into here in a little bit is going to be really important. So, an opinion piece certainly contributes to ongoing discussions and debates, but we're going to have to look for some other things to make sure we're getting the whole story. Editorials, so these might be invited experts. Again, you might get additional commentary on recent research or broader issues. And then letters to the editor might be things that are corrections or maybe additional comments that needed to be provided on previously published issues, things like that. And the reason I have the little dog nose here is that's because this is where you might have to do a little bit more investigation, because it's not so much empirical, but a little bit more opinion. So we have to be careful there. All right, so now taking it to that next level, let's get into that peer review thing. So I think this is where it can be a little bit challenging too, right? We think peer review is the be all end all, but there's limitations, right? In this peer review process, it can be really hard. It's got some limitations. So I think we've mentioned confirmation bias already, but I think sometimes it's unconscious, right? Because people just kind of may naturally have some confirmation bias, and it has been shown in some studies that there's been bias against, different groups of people. And so, that may be there inherently, but then people may already show bias towards their own beliefs or certain types of work. And I have to admit, for me, an example that I recall was a new publication was coming out in animal training. And I remember thinking, oh, that looks interesting. Maybe that's something I can contribute to. But then when I looked at the editorial board, I was like, oh, there's no way they're going to be interested in anything that I have to contribute. I could already see the bias just in the people that were selected to be the editors. So I was like, yeah, that's probably not a publication for my work. So it's there, you can see that it's there sometimes. It can be slow. If there's so much being input into the system, and the people doing the reviewing are overwhelmed, they potentially can be less thorough and take a long time to review things. And so that kind of may potentially lead to certain things getting through or not getting the attention they need. And then you also have to think about sort of the methodological limitations. There we go. So what I was reading was saying that the peer review typically, is more designed to look at, sort of the technological aspects or the technical aspects. I'm having a hard time talking this morning. So they may not be equipped to find those hidden agendas that may be going on there, which reminded me of I remember hearing about this, but I didn't go back and research it again for this particular live stream. But I remember hearing about this. I think it was, I don't know if it was a specific individual or a group. I think it was a specific individual who was directing people who were working under him. I don't recall if it was a university or not, but basically they kept readjusting their data to keep producing journal articles that would produce the results they wanted for different outlets, if that made sense. So they kept tweaking the data to get the results that they wanted. So basically, they had a hidden agenda and they were manipulating the data. So they were fabricating stuff, which is the difficulty detecting fraud. And they kept getting everything published over and over again. And I think it had something to do with some sort of business or marketing thing that they were trying to accomplish. And so it was just basically using the publishing world to, get to their desired outcomes. And, I feel like it had something to do with studying consumers and how they, consume certain things or something like that. I can't remember the details of it. I'll have to go back and look it up. It was kind of a story that was being retold in a podcast that I was listening to, so I'll have to find it again. But it was just that whole thing about, how the system can be worked, unfortunately, in bad ways. But yeah, I think the most, one of the most famous ones that you can look up is the Sokol. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, Sokol or Sokol hoax, where this Alan Sokol intentionally wrote an article that was essentially nonsense, but not as nonsensical as the bird one that you saw, because he did submit it to a legitimate publishing or a legitimate journal. But what he did is he made it sound very, very good. He used language that would make sense for his community, but he also appealed to the confirmation bias and the ideological preconceptions of the peers that were reviewing that journal. And he did it intentionally to see if they would let it slide through, and they did publish it. And so it was very controversial because he admitted the hoax after it was published and basically told them that, that's what he was testing to see. Would you push it through if I wrote it in such a way that it appealed to you on these different levels, and they did. And of course, they went back and forth about, why they let it through and why, he did what he did. And each side had kind of their argument there. But it just was, kind of trying to expose, for him, he was trying to expose the flaws in the peer review system, which, again, it's, they're doing the best they can. But of course, if somebody wants to abuse it, they can potentially, is what that point of that was. So some other limitations, people are peer reviewing for free. They're not getting paid for this, which makes sense because you wouldn't want a peer reviewer to be able to be bought, which, wouldn't be fair either. And I've done it before as well. And it's not, it is time consuming, and it is, you may review an article once and then it gets sent, and you make your suggestions and then it comes back to you and then you have to do it again. And, and I think it's hard on the person who's written the article as well. And so it's I don't really think it's a very fun process to, and I get the importance of it. But yeah, I think it's hard for both sides, to be honest. And then you may have inconsistency. Different reviewers may have different interpretations or different knowledge of the subject matter. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing for some of the things that we talk about here in this community. The whole constructional approach thing, and seeing the value of negative reinforcement as a shaping procedure when a behavior is maintained by negative reinforcement, nonlinear contingency analysis, all of that there's very few that actually are understanding that and use that and know that, and how many are actually, peer reviewers that understand those things. So, that's a great thing to evaluate. How many journal articles that publish on those topics would have peer reviewers that understand that. I think it's probably a very small subset. So lack of training and standardization. Some reviewers may not have adequate training in how to even do peer reviewing. So again, maybe inconsistencies in the process. And then all this could lead to sort of some things being rejected that shouldn't be rejected, that are probably really good information that need to get out there. And then it also leads to things being accepted that shouldn't be accepted, that probably should be left or asked to be revised, or maybe just not, in the system at all. So that's why I have my swiping right when you should have swiped left. So let's see, what else do we have here? It was mentioned conflicts of interest. So again, even though, like I said, peer reviewers are typically not paid to help avoid that, there could be other types of, and are the results repeatable? Yeah, that goes back to our, that's going to come up in another section. So that's a good point. Conflicts of interest. So even though money typically isn't exchanged, there could be other things that are conflicts of interest, right? So maybe there's a relationship. Although typically you're not supposed to know the author or the name of the author of the, when you're reviewing the submission. It's supposed to be sort of a blind review, although maybe that doesn't, who knows? Sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes they do know. But again, if the person who is submitting has a hidden agenda and you don't know it, that could be a challenge, right? So, so there's some challenges there. And again, when we're saying limited diversity in reviewers, it could be that issue that how many people in the pool of peer reviewers have, knowledge of some of these topics that are now coming to the surface, like we were saying before. And then, of course, once the thing is out there, can those things that are problematic be corrected? Sometimes not. So there isn't really a great post-publication process for correcting and retracting things that are not so great. And of course, as I mentioned before, open access. So the rise of open access journal has introduced challenges, including the need for, as it says, sustainable funding models, potential conflicts of interest, and concerns about the rigor of the peer review process in some of these open access journals. Whew, so that was a lot of stuff there on that. So, but the bottom line is that publishing a poor article matters, right? Because once it's out there, it can be viewed as validation, right? So it got published. So does that mean the journal and the peers validated it? They said it was A-okay. And now that author is going to say, yeah, I'm cool. It got validated, and they can, use that as validation for their information, and somebody else might reference it as valid material. And so this is where we got to be careful, right? So, to me, all those steps beforehand, really important, but let's say it got past that. So now it's published. Now what happens? Now it's in our hands. Now we have to do something to evaluate what we're looking at, because the steps preceding us, it got through. So now what do we do? So now it's up to us to do what's called a critical appraisal. So we're going to look at the journal article as the consumer and evaluate that article based on its strengths and its weaknesses. And we can do a detailed examination of those research methods, the findings and conclusions, to determine the trustworthiness and the reliability of the research or the content. And so this kind of is where Cynthia mentions, it being repeatable, and there were some other things that were mentioned previously that really fall into these next steps here. So we're going to get into that. So we're going to evaluate the following. We're going to look at the reliability, and that refers to the consistency, the stability, or the repeatability. It means consistent outcomes when the same phenomenon is measured under consistent conditions. And validity refers to the accuracy and the appropriateness of the measures proposed, the evidence and the information. And then credibility. Can the content and the content producer be trusted? So there's more things you can measure, but these are some big ones that we can look at. And we're going to break these down a little bit more, because there's even more to all of this. This is just sort of some broad definitions of those things that we can look at. So let's look at reliability. I think this is probably the most important part to me when I was looking at all of this. So again, confirmation bias comes up a lot. So and again, we can look at it for both the research ones, the empirical ones, but also the opinion-based ones. So you want to think about, are they providing all sides of the argument? Are they giving you all the data, or are they just cherry picking? Are they missing the alternative current research, relevant research and information? And so for me, like an article I was reading not too long ago was talking about, because as you know, I'm very interested in the negative reinforcement stuff. There's this article that was sort of doing like an overview of negative reinforcement, and and clearly their agenda was to say negative reinforcement's bad. And so all the studies they showed were just using that sort of contrived negative reinforcement, not a situation where the behavior was maintained by already existing negative reinforcement in the environment, but we're going to insert an aversive stimulus to evoke responses. And the article isn't that old, this overview. And so to me, what was missing was essentially all the work that we've seen from UNT, from all those students there who have demonstrated the value and the benefit. Like, it even showed that positive reinforcement won't work for a behavior that's maintained by negative reinforcement, that essentially you get superimposition. And so I felt like, wow, this article is really showing confirmation bias. And so that was a big issue for me on that one. And then like not referencing the original source. So again, to me, that kind of indicates a lack of a thorough literature review. And again, kind of cherry picking to support maybe who they want to support, or, and you kind of go, well, why did they choose that reference when I know there's all these other references out here? So I was reading something that was talking about punishment. Now we know there's a lot of research out there on punishment, and there's some really big names that worked on punishment. But what was referenced was one of these articles that was written by someone and posted on their website. So it's a self-published article. One of the articles was by one of the big names in punishment. So they had two references, and the other one was this self-published piece of work. And so there's a really cool article, on the history of behavior analysis on the association, from the Association of Behavior Analysis International publication. And that one had 66 different references. And some of the names on that were, of course, Azrin and Holtz, who are big names in punishment, empirical studies. Van Houten, Bear, Wolf, Skinner, Iwata, Critchfield, Mace, Johnston. Who else did they have? I'm missing a few here. Hanley, Fisher, Golddiamond, Bailey, Birch. I mean, those are big names in behavior analysis that were referenced on that particular article. So, there's no shortage of big names. So for me, it was a big red flag that punishment was, referenced a self-published article, and only one of that, of the more well-known names, articles, when an article on when an actual article on the history of punishment, shows me that these are all the things that could have been referenced. So misrepresentation of information. So what was I have some examples of things here. So let's say somebody cites something, but then they, because they want to kind of include it, they think it's important to include it, but then they kind of put a little twist on it to sort of misrepresent what it actually says. So they say, oh, well, here's what it is, but you can't really do it. So that one to me was like, why did you put it in the article, but then say you can't do it? That doesn't make sense to me. When of course, for me, I know for me, I was like, well, you can do it, but maybe this author doesn't know that. And so that was a red flag for me. And then maybe, doesn't understand, the information that they were putting in there. So they described something and then just kind of described it incorrectly, or making sort of big conclusory statements that everyone is doing it a certain way, but sort of missing pieces of the story, and that to me was sort of misleading and not quite accurate. So that was a red flag for me. And again, also, again, talking about negative reinforcement, sort of conflating negative reinforcement with always being aversive control, when, again, those of us that have some knowledge about some of the things we've learned about behavioral freedom, things like that, we also know that 0 degrees of freedom with positive reinforcement can be coercive as well. So again, we kind of have to be careful that we're understanding what we're reading, because these statements can be misleading. So let's see here. What were some of the other ones that I was noticing? And so the reference is not related to or supports the statement. So that's where it goes back to the references, making sure that that even though it's got a reference, did you check the reference? And if you're not familiar with it, because I think it gets really easy to read an article and you just go, oh yeah, it was referenced. But then I do go back and I go, well, what is that reference that they're talking about? And is it actually talking about what they're saying it's talking about? And so that always is one of those things I'm like, let's see, what's that about? And then citation bias, not providing a thorough literature review. Again, we kind of mentioned that already. So why are they picking the references that they're picking? And then this is a really important one. Citation validity, not providing high quality references. And this is worthy of its own slide. So check those references. So self-references, this one I don't mind giving you resources. Like sometimes like in my material, you'll see I have resources where I'll say, hey, you can check this out for more information, because I feel like it's a consumer friendly resource. Like it's just easy for you to read this, and it'll help you understand the content. I don't know that I would use it as like an empirical reference per se. But because the problem with some of these self-references is it turns into it's true because I say it's true, and here's a reference to where I said it's true, so therefore it's true. That isn't data, so to speak. So just because it was a self-published material, like a blog or an article on a website, I don't know that qualifies so much as a, empirical data and a really strong, valid reference. Same with a conference presentation or proceeding that has this limited peer review. And I would say the same for position statements, especially if it's something that was written by the author themselves. So those are things that I look at sort of with a critical eye, and I think maybe, I don't know how strong of a reference that is for me. Same with popular magazines, or opinion pieces or commentaries or care manuals or and the surveys, questionable. I mean, you have to look at those with a critical eye. Some surveys can be beneficial, some not. So the way that I think about some of these references is that it's kind of like building an article that's built on a house of cards. If your article is based on references that are flimsy, then the whole thing just kind of falls apart, right? So you really want good quality references that are not just cherry picked, that are so you don't have all this confirmation bias, but you have strong arguments and you're showing both sides so that you really have this, really solid foundation that's built on a lot of empirical stuff, from a lot of valid references that carries everything that you're saying. So that really stands out for me. So I do really check those references. And I want to go back to and the reason I have this here is because the problem with reliability is you can make all these arguments and it'll sound really good, but what will happen is everything will sound like it's all supporting the same argument and it sounds really reliable, but what happens is everything is just missing the target of validity. So it sounds like it's true and accurate, but it's all off center of the target of validity. Right? So that's why I had this little picture here of it's just missing the mark. So that's a good metaphor. When your reliability is all pointing towards one thing because, you've done all this confirmation bias and you're doing all this sort of a persuasive arguing that's off to the side, but with citation bias and lack of citation validity and misleading statements and misinformation, but it's all pointing towards one thing, but it's all off center. It's all off the mark of validity. All right. So now let's go to some of these validity red flags. So your arguments are not backed by actual evidence. And that's where we were saying, that basically all your reliability is off center. And so your statements are basically opinions masquerading as facts because you've got all those reliability issues. So just because a statement is made with sort of authority and you're really adamant about it, and you've got your self-references, it doesn't make it true. So another one that was brought up that Alex, I think, said about the language kind of, for me, that language that's sort of switching between colloquial and technical jargon, that's a red flag for me. Like, do you use words like treat when you mean appetitive? Or do you say, animals are super intelligent and smart when, that's not really talking about behaviors? And then one for me that's a really big red flag is how the word positive is used. So like if you're talking about positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, but then you start saying, you start using positive to mean good in your literature, then you start confusing the reader. Because what starts to happen is people conflate positive reinforcement with good, and they conflate negative reinforcement with bad. And I think that's a big problem because it's subtle, but that's what the reader starts getting out of there. So you start talking about positive animal welfare, or that, people are doing positive things for animal because they're using positive reinforcement. It's like that's got two different meanings. So you need to be careful about your language there. So, so those need to be addressed. And then we also, and the interchanging between using positive meaning good or meaning positive reinforcement drives me crazy. Yeah. Kristen says we see that a lot for sure. And then the article unintentionally contradicting itself. And so again, so for me, article I was reading was sort of arguing against itself, where, it was saying how, all these things are being trained with positive reinforcement. And then it was saying, but, we can't train with degrees of freedom. And I'm like, but if it's 0 degrees of freedom, then positive reinforcement's coercive and your positive reinforcement isn't good. So, it's kind of like it didn't really understand what it was saying and it was contradicting itself. So, so all of that was really jumping out at me as sort of issues. So you can't say that, the industry is advancing if it's, by using positive reinforcement, if it doesn't understand degrees of freedom and 0 degrees of freedom, and that it needs to expand degrees of freedom to get away from coercive positive reinforcement, and genuine choice isn't genuine. So, or choice isn't genuine without increasing those degrees of freedom. So, so it was, those are the kinds of things that, jump out at me as red flags. All right. So let me see if I missed anything that I wanted to share with you on that. Okay. Sorry. I had so many things that I was like, I'm going to have too many slides for you if I put all these on slides, and you're going to be going, oh, stop with the slides, lady. Okay, let's move on to credibility. Oh my gosh. So that was another one you guys brought up, which was great. So you can ask yourself, who wrote this? And what are their qualifications on the subject matter? And that brought me back to the negative reinforcement paper. Because like I said, that one to me had the confirmation bias, and their references also were, very specifically selected, and they omitted other research, that relevant research that was out there. And so I was like, well, who wrote this? I don't know this person. And so when I went and looked up who wrote this, they weren't anybody in the field of behavior and training. They were somebody who studied a subject matter that was completely off center from this. And what I got from it was that they probably were somebody that got really excited about behavior. And granted, they are somebody who deals in like, they do research, but not in this particular area. And so I think they just got, I don't know, I'm speculating, but I'm thinking they got excited about training like a lot of us do when we first learned about training. And because they had a background in academia, they thought, oh, I'm going to write about this. But with their limited exposure to this particular topic and maybe individuals in the field, they did a very narrow publication. They didn't really have exposure to all the other things that were going on with negative reinforcement. And so now we've got this article that's very biased, in my opinion. And now it's being used as the example of negative reinforcement is bad. And so this concerns me because it's being referenced in other articles and being held up as the example, but it's not by somebody that I would consider as an expert, subject matter expert on this topic. And so I'm keeping that in the back of my mind. If I ever see that reference somewhere, to me, that's a like, oh, well, this person is using this specifically because that is confirmation bias for them, that, they can use that as a way to prove their point. They're disregarding all the other information that's out there on negative reinforcement, especially having been produced since 2007, I think, from UNT, that shows us that, there are ways that negative reinforcement is applied in ways that is important and helpful and beneficial to animals, that we are investigating and exploring and giving many examples of. So again, it shows us that, those of us that have been applying it, it would be helpful for us to do more examples, publish, research, all that kind of stuff, because it needs to be demonstrated as well that these behaviors that are maintained by negative reinforcement, that, where we're not intentionally inserting aversive stimuli to evoke behavior, but, they're not going to be fixed by positive reinforcement. We need to first address that negative reinforcement contingency before positive reinforcement will be effective. All right, off my soapbox on that. Okay, Annetta says yes. All right, so again, what are the qualifications? What's their education, professional experience, life experience, research experience? What is their bias towards the subject matter? Do they show you all sides of the argument or only one? What is their objective? Is it to inform? Is it to sell? Is it to convince? Is it to take action? Where does their information come from? Solid evidence or just their opinion? What is their relationship to the references? I think this is an important one too. Why are they bringing these references into the conversation, and why are they omitting the other ones? When we write a journal article, our goal, hopefully is to inform. And so, theoretically, we should be bringing all sides of the argument to the conversation. And so again, are these quality references? So we go back to that slide on check those references. And so, that's a tough one, but I think citation bias and citation validity is one that we don't think about too much. It's not fun to have to go through the references, especially if there's so many of them. But I think what I start to see more and more, the more that I do it, the more that I practice this behavior, is I start recognizing different publications, and I go back and I read them over time. It takes time, but you start to get familiar with different publications. You start recognizing them. They jump out at you very quickly that, oh, I know that one. I have some familiarity with that one. I've read that one before. And you kind of remember what they're about, and which ones are ones that you would be like, oh, that's a good one. Or, oh, that one, I know that one's, self-published, or just a popular one because everyone's sharing it, but I don't know if it's a valid one for me. So, you start to become a little bit better at making the discrimination between a good reference and a not so good one. All right. So credibility red flags. And I took this dodgy word from one of the resources that I studied to put this together, because this guy had a British accent, and the way he said it was so good. He was like, credibility, does it just seem dodgy? And I was like, oh, that's great. So does the author have something significant to gain, or maybe they're trying to avoid something, by publishing what they're publishing? What's behind it? Could there be a conflict of interest going on there? Is there some financial or relationship or status or benefits or gifts going on that has contributed to what the content here? Are they pushing personal agendas? Is there a lack of competency in the subject matter? Are you seeing sort of a do as I say, but not as I do thing going on here? So maybe you have some information that the author, their practices in real life don't really align with what they produced in writing. Who knows? Sometimes that happens. And maybe they're recasting the story. This was actually in the resource that I'm quoting here, to portray something ideal versus what really happens. And there were some specific words for that I don't recall the technical term for it. But they said that this can happen a lot in research, that people, they kind of write, the ideal experiment versus what really happened in what they produce on paper. And so you have to be careful about that too, that what got published is, the perfect version versus what really happens in real life. And then I heard this really great presentation by I'm forgetting his name right now, but it'll come to me later. A great behavior analyst. He gave a wonderful presentation about dogmatic versus pragmatic approach to things, where a dogmatic person would be very rigid in their views, like this is the way it should be, or the way I do it, versus pragmatic, where you're flexible and you adapt based on new evidence. And really his whole presentation was all about publication and how people will, and also about people sticking with certain approaches to behavior analysis or interventions and whatnot, because they're just wedded to this is the way I want it. I'm stuck to this method and I'm not changing my ways, even though there might be evidence that there's better ways to do things. And it was a great presentation. I don't know if I can get him to do it for us for goats or something. I hope to see him at the upcoming Association of Behavior Analysis International Conference, and maybe he'll do it for us. But it was really very tied into what we're talking about today, and how in lots of communities, including human psychology, where that situation occurs, where there's lots of reasons why people stick to, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to make sure it gets published and whatnot. So we look for that too. If you see that the article seems to be very, very rigid, even though there's evidence out there that there are better ways of doing things, then that could also be a red flag for you as well. Why are they stuck in their ways? Why are they not evolving? So there you go. So that was a lot of talking, man. I don't know if you guys have some other things to add to that. So the website that I wanted to mention, it's called Equator Network. It's more focused towards maybe like medical research, but I believe it's Equator-Network. They have published like guidelines for writing all different kinds of papers, and it's almost like a checklist, and sort of kind of like a validity checklist on all these different types of papers. And so, like I said, I only covered like a few different kinds of papers. Most of them are like research papers, but you can basically like look up the kind of research paper and see if it meets the checklist of all these different things, and so that's kind of cool. It was just too many things for me to add to this, but you can check that out too. And of course I'll have all that in animaltrainingfundamentals.com, the links to all that stuff. So to kind of recap here, so as animal training moves more towards evidence-based practices, it's beneficial to become excellent critical thinkers. This means learning to critically appraise scholarly literature. It can take practice to become fluent in this behavior, but the benefits are tremendous, not only in terms of our knowledge, but also in terms of helping us decide what practices to implement to improve our animal training and ultimately animal welfare. We must evaluate several factors carefully. These include the publication, the type of article, the peer reviewers, the peer review process, the article's reliability, its validity, and the author's credibility. Each element should be examined further to expose important details that can help determine if an article is a gem to add to your library or junk destined for the trash bin, or maybe somewhere in between. Critically appraising literature is no small task, but it's well worth it. You will learn to spot the diamonds quickly and also explain how you made the selection or that discrimination. So there you go. That was our overview on how you can critically appraise all those articles that are coming at you like crazy these days. So I do have a few more sources for you. We have a critical thinking skills podcast with Dr. Suzanne Hetz and Dr. Dan Estep. They go into a lot more about the different types of articles in that podcast, which was very helpful. We also have a live stream on animal training being influenced by confirmation bias. So we go deeper into confirmation bias. We also have one on propaganda and its impact on the animal training community. What else is on the horizon? So very soon I get to talk about more information about degrees of freedom because I will be in Italy. I hope you can join me live, anybody in Europe over there, or if you're traveling to Europe. I'll be talking about improving welfare by providing genuine choice in animal training. So I guess that's why I feel pretty close to degrees of freedom right now, because I've got lots of examples for you. I'm going to show you so many examples of providing genuine choice in animal training. So yes, it can be done. I think this is one of these things things that is hard for us to visualize. We're so used to only one way for animals to access desired outcomes with positive reinforcement. But I'm going to give you just a lot more detail to how this can work. So I'm super excited about that. And we're also going to be teaching a workshop there. Annetta Peterson and I and Jim Mackey will be teaching an introduction to training, and then we're also going to be doing another one on about distance. It's basically called "Please Go Away," and so that one will be fun too. And then a reminder, as always, if you're interested in getting animal training credentials, we have a very in-depth animal training credentialing program at animaltrainingfundamentals.com. We've got problem solving, program development, introductory training information, how to train, behavior science, the whole works, something for every level, wherever you're at in your development. And that is included in your membership. So check it out at animaltrainingfundamentals.com. Here's the citation speaking of citations and all that kind of fun stuff. I do have a citation here if somebody wants to reference it. I get it. It is self-published, use it as you will. And of course, if you want to join us at animaltrainingfundamentals.com, we have a monthly membership that you can cancel at any time. Use this as much as you want or as little. An annual, that's a significant savings. And then the facility option, which you can have up to 200 members. That's our best deal right there. And you get access to everything. All right. And what do we have here? Annetta says, yes, can't wait for the thing in Italy. That's going to be a lot of fun. And Cynthia says, I wish she could see the talk in Europe at IAZA. Carrie says, oh man, I wish I could be there. I know, and Joe Lang's going to be there too. So we're super excited about that. Annetta's going to be talking about superimposition. And again, I'll be talking about degrees of freedom. And Annetta says that I bet that Barbara will make that presentation on degrees of freedom and giving genuine choice available at animaltrainingfundamentals.com. Maybe might be a good reason to become a member if you haven't yet. I usually do make my presentations available as courses in here, so hang on for that. All right, and Ruth says thank you. And again, I hope you find this informative and helpful as you evaluate journal articles, or any article for that matter. I mean, it doesn't have to be a scholarly article. It can just be something that you're reading for the heck of it, and maybe give you some tools to make some decisions about what you're reading. And heck, apply it to my stuff too. I mean, I'm always trying to evolve and grow and change, and I learned from doing these live streams with you to help me do better by my stuff. There's a lot of stuff that I've published in the past that I'm like, oh, I want to yank that now. I feel like I've learned so much since then. Okay. Yes, and thanks, Barbara. Let's hope yours too. Annetta, thank you so much. Definitely have to watch this one again. Yeah, there's a lot of content in this, and those of you that are members, you're going to see all the reference material and all the additional resources where you can check out everything that I was looking at, so that you can take a deeper dive if you want on this topic, because there's a lot to learn about this. So it's a heavy topic, but good one for us, so that we can continue to grow. And and this is such an important topic to help our community grow. Look, we're the same words. Thanks for another thought-provoking live stream. All right, great, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me. And we will be taking a few weeks off. Yeah, Hillary says laughs. We will be taking a few weeks off from live streams due to the upcoming events, but I'll have some stuff for you. So don't worry. Keep an eye on your emails for notifications, and social media for notifications of new stuff coming out. And I'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.